with it. Um, I'm very excited to have you all here today. So thank you all for being here. Oops. So I would like to thank you all for being here in the name of the Bloom. Before we start, just to share a little bit about the Bloom, we are a global community of passionate change makers. We connect people through stories, shared knowledge, and meaningful mentorship. And our goal is to create spaces where careers bloom, where collaboration thrives, and always with joy and solidarity. So this is one of the spaces that we host. So we are happy to have here Unearthodox with us to have this amazing event. And just before we start, I'm going to run a poll here to hear from you. Where are you joining from? So we'll see some regions. So please, you can reply to it so we can have an idea. Thank you all for sharing in the chat as well. Where are you coming from? So it's great to understand a little bit more about the regions that we have here present with us today. So I will go quickly to some guidelines that we have so we can make the most of this event. So first of all, if you can have your camera on, please, it's good because it helps us to connect. And we invite you also to close the tabs that you have open so you can be fully present here with us. And if you are not speaking, you can please turn off your mic so we can hear our speakers clearly. And one thing that we have in the Bloom is the participatory listening. So we invite you to drop your seeds of wisdom as we go. So whenever you hear a nice quote, something that stood out to you, feel free to type in the chat and send so we can have some great seeds of wisdom between all of us. And you can also use the chat to share some reflections, to ask some questions. We'll have a moment for Q&A, so you can share some questions. Meanwhile, we'll be gathering the questions to answer at the end, at the Q&A moment. And also feel free to interact. The only thing that we ask for you not to share is LinkedIn profiles. Otherwise, things will be very hectic and a lot of things and a lot of information. So we invite you to share, and maybe later, if you want the contact of one of you, we can always facilitate this contact between you. So what we're going to have today, we'll have two hosts with us guiding the conversation, which is Anka and Nisha, and also four authors, actually three, but they will let them know about the authors of the Anthology of Regenerative Futures, a tapestry of voices. So we'll have 10 minutes for each author, and you'll see a timer. I'll put a timer with the countdown of 9 minutes. Then you'll hear some sound, which means that the 9 minutes has reached, and then you'll have 1 minute to wrap up, and then we can move forward to the next speaker. And with that, we can have a good quality time of hearing everyone. So again, thank you all for being here. And let me close the poll. And yeah, I will pass the mic to our two amazing hosts, Anka and Nisha.
Beautiful. Thank you to our colleagues from Loom for the welcome. Welcome, everyone. I will start and then I will hand over to my gracious co-host, Nisha. For those who have been with us on this journey already, and to the ones that are just joining us for the first time, thank you for making the time to be here with us. We know that your time is valuable and it really means a lot to have you here. Please bring your attention, your curiosity, your care. And wherever you're joining us from, please feel free to make yourself comfortable. I really encourage you to take the phone and go for a walk and listen to this conversation, or grab a refreshing drink, or sit back on the sofa, or even as I sometimes like to do on calls. This is a place, as the colleagues from Bloom said, to listen, to reflect, to engage, and be with the ideas in a way that works for you. Now, my name is Anka Damaro. I am the Director of Innovation for Unearthodox. Today we will hear a bit about Unearthodox. We will then move into listening from the authors of the chapters of the anthology, and we will open up a space for questions at the end of the presentations. For those of you who may be new to the work of Unearthodox, we focus on thought leadership in addressing nature society challenges in order to open, I would say, new ways of seeing and doing things. The good part is that we don't stop there. We also bring those ideas into action, and we support innovators that are experimenting with these thought leadership ideas in practice. And so far, we have been supporting tens of innovators across all continents. We've been nurturing them, and we have been inspired by them. And this anthology has directly influenced and shape the kind of spaces we are opening, the type of innovators and regenerative initiatives that we are currently supporting. Now, the Anthology of Regenerative Future is part of a wider exploration under a program that we refer to as the Regenerative Futures. And we have been working and leading this program for the last 3 years. We'd be very happy to share our learnings from bringing together the plurality of perspectives that we have done so throughout this journey, combining arts and sciences and different types of knowledges and cultures, as well as share the ideas and innovators that we have been supporting in practice. Now, today, this is the first session of 2 sessions. This session focuses on the Anthology of Regenerative Futures as a narrative, as a provocation, as a tapestry of perspectives. And in the next session, the date will be confirmed soon, we will look inward. We will look at reflecting the processes behind the tensions, the challenges, and what it really takes to co-create a piece like this. Now, before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the people who have held this work with such care. I want to say a very heartfelt to my colleague Anaik, who's here with us in the room, who has co-held this process with deep care and consideration throughout, to the Unearthodox team, and I cannot name all the names, who have each dedicated significant time and energy to navigating the complexity of this work, and as well as to our CEO, to the board, to the funders, who have been willing to hold the space for this work to take place, to learn alongside us, and to really engage with the uncertainty and the depth that this kind of work requires. Now, Nisha, my gracious co-host, will shortly introduce the authors as well, who are absolutely at the center of this work, and without whom this anthology would not exist. But on behalf of Unearthodox, and personally, I also want to extend our deep gratitude to them, and also to the communities and knowledge holders around the world who have shared their perspective, their practices, and their wisdom so generously for us to learn from. And what you will hear today is rooted in lived experiences, not in abstractions. And with that, I really want to begin not with a definition, but with a few statements. These are not theories, these are not frameworks, these are ways of seeing and being in the world. So if you don't mind, I just want to turn to my notes. So, and apologies for the pronunciation of the community names. I'm still getting my head around pronouncing them correctly. But I'll start by saying that in the Kurichia community in Wayanad, India, when decisions are made, everyone gets 1 vote, except a pregnant woman. She gets 2, because who cares more about the future than someone carrying it? In a conversation with a Katunayakan elder in southern India, someone asks, "How would you design a city?" And the answer is immediate. "I would make all the roads of mud so that when my child falls, he will not get hurt." In the forests of the Nilgiri Hills, the Kadar people describe how they find their way home. Not with the GPS, not with maps, but by walking, sensing, letting the path live inside their body. until their feet can guide them, even in the dark. In the Andes, among Aymara communities, time itself is understood differently. The past is in front of you. It is visible, it is known. The future is behind you. It is unseen, it is approached with care. And then there's another story, and this story is something that it really resonated with me deeply. A story retold in this anthology. A group of ants that find a pen, and they study it obsessively. They look at the structure, they look at the movement, they look how it connects to a hand, and they map everything. But they never understand that it is writing. They understand the system, but they miss the meaning. And here is probably the provocation. What if we are those ants? Because the challenge is not just what we see, but how we have been taught to actually see. In many indigenous languages of the Americas, there is no word for nature as something separate from humans, because humans are part of the living world, not outside it. In Kiswahili, spoken across East Africa, the word mazingira means environment, but it includes both the social and the ecological at once. So the question is not just what is regeneration. I think the question is what realities become possible when we take these ways of seeing seriously. And I will conclude by saying that this work to me has been deeply personal, because as these ways of seeing opened up in the process, it felt like an entirely new world was being revealed. And at the same moment, I also begin to see more clearly my own place within the world and the footprints of harm I carry, and often unconsciously. Hasn't been comfortable. It asked me to really slow down. It asked me to create space for reflection, for care, and to learn how to look at myself, at my work with a different kind of honesty. And I would say from a place of maturity and deep care, where I can actually understand that I'm here to grow as well as a human. Now, Nisha here is one of the two co-leads of the process that led to the development of the anthology, alongside Lua Koto, who is also present with us. And each one of them will co-host one session related to this work. Today, I have the honor to introduce Nisha. And Nisha is an architect. She's an environmental planner from Kerala, India. And she works at the intersection of bioregionalism, spiritual ecologies, and regenerative futures. She's the founder of Woven Design Collaborative. It's a multidisciplinary spatial planning frame that design, strategizes, and weaves at the confluence of human habitat, planning, and the natural system. What an interesting space to play in, Nisha. And her practice is rooted in indigeneity, intersectional feminism, ecological wisdom, and strategic transformation. And she leads various programs on whole systems, restorative land, and futures literacy in North America, in Europe, in Asia. And she, to me, brings this intuitive and the analytical working very well with the inner and the outer systems to support leaders, organizations like ourselves to reimagine how we live, govern, relate, and regenerate. And if I may add, Nisha has a very strong relationship with the ocean. I can see her bloom every time she talks about her swims in the ocean. Now, I will conclude by saying that both Lua and Nisha occupy a special place in my heart alongside the authors of the anthology, because despite all of our differences and hard work to birth this anthology, I hope that I can say in the name of all present here, there has been a great space of learning and growing individually, and I think most importantly to all of us collectively as a unit. So over to you, Nisha.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Anka. Yeah, so I will maybe just give a little bit of a quick introduction. on the overarching sort of vision and the work. As Anka said, I co-led this process along with Lua, who will later present one of the chapters as well. So the vision for this project started with a question of what is regeneration? But very, very early in the process, we realized that that is not something static, that is not something that can be captured or contained easily. And so this entire process and this entire product, which is the outcome of this process, really came out of a process that was intended to open up more questions, open up more avenues of inquiry, rather than provide answers or provide static definitions and put things into a box, right? So this was inherently in this entire the anthology, which is the outcome of this process, and which is an ever evolving sort of
This meeting is being recorded.
It's an ever evolving step of the next stages as well of Unearthodox's larger work. It's inherently alive. It's plural. And the idea was to go beyond creating definitions and frameworks, but rather capture the vastness of this realm of regeneration, which is pretty much one of the underlying ways of being that the earth itself embodies. So we focused on lived experiences, relationships, and ways of being. Can you go to the next slide? So one of the two very interesting things that Lou and I thought of that was part of this larger project and was so deeply embraced by each of the authors who were part of this work, as well as the entire team of Unearthodox, were tension and emergence. When dealing with very complex topics and complex with a lot of
just we hear an echo. Can you try again now?
Is it better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
So we talked of two things, emergence and tension. Because yes, this involved authors from across the world coming together collaboratively to create this information, put together this information. And we wanted to break a lot of the boundaries that exist within these realms of research and science. And that was the pluriversality of it, to go beyond the idea of one truth and one science. But if there are thousands and thousands of truths and thousands of ways of being, how do we relate it all into an 80-page sort of a report, right? So we, in our vision and the process that was created, we put emergence at the center. So there were some guiding questions, there was a lot of collaboration, and we kept moving with emergence. And that was in itself regenerative because there was a lot of evolution in the process. And the second was tension that emerged when so many different viewpoints and perspectives and cultures come together. It's bound to have a lot of tension. But as part of this process, we deeply embraced that tension. We embodied it. We sat with the discomfort. And that was also something that was how we intended the entire project to be birthed itself, that within these cradles of emergence and tension. Next slide. So to create, how do we create possibility, right? How do we open up possibility? And that was the kind of question that we sat with it. So we a deep dive into ideas of no single definition, but if we are to be truly regenerative, we provide a base of information from across the world and don't go into definitions and frameworks, but rather open it up to the reader to come up with their own understandings of regeneration along with the author. So the reader is also part of this process and this outcome. We focus a lot on everyday practices and place-based realities as a part of as you will see as we go through the chapters. But that also means that we focus on everyday realities a lot more, because regeneration, as we embodied it, as from where we came from, did not mean it was a goal or it was a place to reach. It wasn't a destination. It is your everyday life. It is how people and the more than human have existed on this planet for years on an everyday basis, on an every action basis. And we seem to have lost that in modernity. So we were trying to bring that back through different examples. And it was an idea of bringing a lot of stories into the picture, because that was a big part of how people embodied knowledge and also transferred wisdom, was in the form of stories. So that is also something that you'll see a lot through this anthology. And of course, the more than human systems is something that we brought into the center of the ethos of the entire process and methodology. We also looked at decoloniality because it was one of in the modernity as we know it is a result of a massive colonization that lasted anywhere between 200 to 600 years across the world. But in even continental Europe was in many ways colonized for thousands of years in some places. So this coloniality has created almost like a chokehold on human evolution. So we focus a lot on decoloniality. And this was, again, part of the tension and the discomfort that we had to all sit with as we contended with all of our traumas, personally, culturally, and as researchers, as people, as representing the people whose work and whose lives we were representing through this research. Next one, please. Yeah. So I'll just speak a couple of things before I hand off to the authors. A little bit about Lua's and my work in this, our complexities of our leadership, and the leadership that Unearthodox complemented us with. So this was a very challenging project in many ways because of the depth and the topic itself. We were breaking away from so many of the norms that defined Western science, defined research, defined the truths in the world. And coming from different backgrounds and different sort of aspirations, different ways of communication, there was a lot of this tension that as leaders, we also had to hold. So I don't want to shy away from this difficulty, but rather own it. It was as Anka also mentioned, it was a huge learning experience. It was a growth experience, and growth is always a very difficult process. So holding multiplicity and collaboration on paper in many ways seems easy, but if we break all the rules that exist, how does that? What really emerges was a question that Lua and I also held. There was a lot of uncertainty. It was a huge, huge task of encapsulating millions of years of evolution of this planet into 80 pages. So there was, the idea of how do we even present knowledge was a lot of uncertainty. And of course, a lot of emotional and relational labor, which went into every single person who was part of this project. And so that was also, there was a lot of emotional involvement, because regeneration is not possible unless we are ourselves part of it. It is a spiritual part of the work as much as it is physical work. So how did each of us had to go through so much? And in our position of leadership, we also had to hold this, which was, so there were many, many difficult emotional points at individual and collective levels, but it's incredible, though, that we've come out of all of this with this beautiful product. And so, I just wanted to highlight the complexity and the invisible work that goes into a project like this, because we see an output, which is a report, but in order to bring these kind of views, in order to be uninhibited, in order to break the boundaries that we are set within, there is a lot of rebirthing that happens at various stages. And this itself is also part of regeneration, because regeneration begins within you. It begins in a community, and it is not something that we sit in one part of the world and control in another part, right? So yeah, with that, I want to also open up this. One of the questions that we, in part of the very initially opened up to everybody was the idea of what utopias do you hold within you, and what are those utopias that you carry. So I want to put this out to each of the people in the audience as well as we go into the rest of it. Like, what utopias do you hold within you? Yes, with that, I would like to quickly introduce all of the chapter authors. So that's, we had 10, well, actually 9 authors, and then there was also Lu and me, who were doing the co-leads, being the co-leads, and there was Lindsay, who was part of the documentation process. And let me just, I'd love to introduce each of them. So we start with chapter 1, which was just as a note. Basically, each author mostly did 2 chapters. They contributed to 2 chapters, and so we have Ranjani Balasubramanian, Chris, who is a researcher and practitioner from the Western Ghats in India. And I will introduce people a little bit more as we go into the chapter. Christina Shamanad, who is a white woman and a scientist trained within the Western academic traditions, but who goes into the epistemological foundations of the privileges that shapes our understanding of regeneration. Karen Park, who's from America, but with her settler background, she works with as a professional linguist with over a decade of collaborative research on language and diversity. Guadalupe Perez Jimenez, who is who recognizes that all expressions deserve equal recognition, respect, and curiosity. And she works through regeneration woven into Inuit hunting practices, in Mapuche textile weaving, and in placenta rituals. And yes, and I will in detail go through and introduce each of the authors who will present. Is that one author from each group will be introduced at the beginning of this thing, and we can maybe go to the one, and who will be presented by Ranjani Balasubramanian. Yeah, this is just an idea of like the geographical spread of the people who were involved in this project. Yeah. All right. To go into chapter 1. So as we started out, what is regeneration as a report, and we from a form of how do we look at it as everyday practices? How do we go beyond the definitions, more intuitive form of understanding? So it started off with stories and kind of perspectives into the stories, and that particular chapter was framed to go into how you can not just but also using imagery, using folklore, evoke different parts of your own mind and being, and engage knowledge and information in that sense. So I just want to introduce just need a second. I'm sorry. I want to introduce the author Ranjini Subramaniam.
And Nisha, if I may, for a moment, would you mind putting your video off because the internet is a bit weak at your end?
Is it better now?
Yes, we can hear you better.
Yes. Yeah. So Ranjini will speak about this chapter. I ask you to introduce yourself a little bit more as you start. This chapter, the first chapter, was with Ranjini Balasubramaniam, Christina Shamanade, Karen Park, and Guadalupe Perez Jimenez. So, Ranjini, please introduce yourself a little bit to take us through.
Thank you, Nisha and Anka. I've just realized that I hate introducing myself. So I will skip that. But I just want to say that, it has been such a journey to work with this group, to work with Unearthodox and Nisha and Lua and the whole team of authors. I think the way we bonded over this, it was quite incredible. And I just want to add that to the acknowledgement that you see on the screen, because this journey would have been very different. It could have been very different. I just want to share that when we started out, this was called a report on the state of knowledge of regenerative futures, and to see how that has evolved to an anthology of regenerative futures, for me is the most incredible journey that all of us have put our heart and also a lot of discomfort. We've sat with discomfort. We have worked with each other, sometimes frustrated, but always at it. So that acknowledgement, I think, needs to be made. So thank you, all of you who worked with us on this. Having said that, the way that this was structured was in 4 chapters. Chapter 1 was to understand what is regeneration. And the 4 of us who worked on it, Christina, Karen, Guadalupe, and myself, we started this approach being researchers largely, saying, okay, what does the literature say about regenerative futures? That's the way we are trained to be. Could we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Having said that, the prompts that were given to us were very interesting. So Nisha and Lua asked us to, get inspired by works of art, by communities, by conversations, and use that as a starting point to explore regeneration. Just doing that and going away from the normal way in which one would approach it shifted our conversations. So just to summarize, I'm sure you will read the report, but just to summarize what I took away from this. I come from a space where I understand regeneration as grounded, embodied, and very contextual. My work is place-based. Largely, I work with communities in the Western Ghats and elsewhere. Yes, but and I also work with decolonial studies. So I do have a strong sorry, just a second. Can you take her? Huh? My daughter just woke up from her sleep and is a little cranky. So I need a minute. Oh, no. Yes, my husband saves the day. Sorry. Yeah. So my approach has largely been one of um, resisting larger guidelines, resisting frameworks, resisting this sort of global approach that we have when it comes to development. My practice started with sustainability, and then I have seen what has happened to sustainability. It has now become a concept that means everything and nothing at the same time. Um, and this sort of resistance to that showed up in my work in regeneration, where I was militantly against, this simplification of something into a framework. Um, and I also recognized that I did have a lot of resistance towards Western ideas of regeneration and a bias towards indigenous approaches. When I came with this, what really shifted my way of thinking was Christina's work, where she spoke about this two-eyed seeing metaphor, where you can hold two ways of seeing at the same time. And that became a point of questioning what can we do other than oppose? What did the collation of paradigms look like? When different knowledge systems work in good faith, what can come out of it? So that was something that shifted as we worked in this chapter. Karen spoke a lot about language. In my practice, I always thought of my role as a mediator and a translator, but with Karen's work, she shows how language shapes relationships and also how meaning can be transformed, translated, and also distorted at the other end of it. Guadalupe then brought in a lot of grounding in the fact that our work needs to be self-reflexive, not once, not as a positionality statement or a reflexive statement, but over and over and over again, questioning ourselves, bringing awareness to who we are and how we are engaging. So all in all, I think as a team, we were able to influence, change, and shift the way that we worked. And the product of that is, I would say, transcends our individual ways of working and seeing the world. Yeah. We can go to the next slide. So some of the key takeaways for that is that regeneration is essentially something active. One cannot study it or talk about it without doing it. So it is based in the doing, and it's based also in the relating. It is not what we do, but how we do it with each other. We also had a lot of conversation about translation, and we realized that each of us also interprets information. So translation is neither comprehensive nor is it complete. And the translator has to carry loss, care, and responsibility in their translation. Many ways of knowing can stand together without trying to be hegemonic in a spirit of collaboration. Also, what we were seeking in this chapter is not a synthesis. It was not to look at, okay, if these are multiple ways of approaching regeneration, how can we create one framework that encompasses all of it? But rather, we were looking at how do we weave together the commonalities while also respecting the nuance and the differences. And the last sort of thing is also that knowing is always situated. And the knower or the seeker needs to always approach it with humility and accountability. And this goes right back to the first thing where we say regeneration is how we relate, and relations come with accountability. So as researchers, it became very important to us to bring that accountability into our research and to the communities that we were researching with. Yeah. Next. Yeah. So how do we take this forward in terms of the way in which we approach our practice? So the first one is that work begins in listening, attunement, and building trust with people and place and the more than human. So being aware of the different entities that inhabit our ecosystem. The second one is that we move knowledge with care. When we were working with communities, we were constantly aware of the knowledge that they have held, the generations through which that knowledge has passed, and how do we take that knowledge and present it or represent it in a way that doesn't disenfranchise them from their knowledge, or in a way that we don't appropriate the knowledge and distort it in some way in our presentation. So the care in moving knowledge is a form of respect to the people that we work with. We also, like I mentioned before, we're trying to resist this allure and ease of universal frameworks. It is very difficult to say, I don't know. It's very difficult to say, yeah, this is hard to explain. It's very difficult to say there's like a million ways to look at it. Especially since I teach design, and if I go into a classroom and I say, yeah, okay, I don't know the answer to this, or yeah, there's no one answer, there are many answers. This is difficult to teach, it's difficult to communicate, it's difficult to universalize. But we have to deal with that difficulty of plurality. We also shifted our approach from authority to accountability, not just for us as researchers, but at every level of the chain in which we were working. And this was also the reason why this process took so long, because we asked for accountability from people like Anka. We said, Anka, if we are doing this, then how do we give the credit? And how do we, how do we take this forward with the community? So the accountability that we felt to the communities, we also asked it of Unearthodox. And this sort of interaction really helped shift the way in which, as a collective, we were looking at this project. We also wanted to be very careful about power and history of coloniality, of even the more nuanced interactions of me interacting with the researchers, or because there is always a power dynamic, and it does play out, and that is coming from historic events and historic societal movements. So how do we attend to that was a question that I don't have an answer to yet, but we attempt always to be fair. And the last part, which is really important, is as we were designing this, we were designing for continuity. And this is something that Nisha, Lua, and even the team at Unearthodox backed us, saying we don't want to just engage in this community once, but let's think of ways in which we can extend this. So this is something that also, as a group of authors, was important.
Ranjani, can I ask you
Yes.
if it's possible for the final thoughts?
Yes, sure. We can go to the last slide. Yeah. And the last slide was this: how does this change things? And it's a simple answer that we don't know whether we want to start by changing things, but rather to change ourselves and to ask ourselves, how do we be differently before we act differently? So in a way, it's bringing everything that is external inside and then really change the way that we are when we live and the way we interact. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ranjani. Since thank you for beautifully taking us through this very multi-perspective process. Since your introduction was so minimal, I will formally introduce you once again. So Ranjani Balasubramanian, based in Bangalore, is a designer, educator, and researcher whose work weaves together design, ecology, and community practice. With a background in architecture and urbanism, she explores how local knowledge, lived experience, and imagination can shape more regenerative ways of living in and with our cities. Her work has engaged with sustainability and post-disaster recovery in the Western Ghats, and her current doctoral research at Srishti Mahe investigates how urban practitioners can decolonize the ways they imagine and build futures. As co-founder of Global Lab, an adjunct facility at Vidyarship University, she continues to nurture participatory place-based approaches to learning and transformation. Thank you so much, Ranjani. We'll go on to the second chapter, which will be was introduced by Karen Parks. So chapter 2 was systems as living networks. It's about systems. It started off being systems and stakeholders, and which I remember there was huge debates between all of us as to what is a system, what is a stakeholder, is it inherently limiting? Who do we decide is stakeholder in this vastly complex world? So this chapter essentially reframes the idea of systems and stakeholders and goes from it being linear constructs and moves away from that and goes into it being interconnected, evolving networks of relationships. We draw a lot from grassroots and social justice movements, and it surfaces how histories and communities and ecological realities are all entangled. And it reveals both tensions and possibilities. So this was a very complex chapter because we wanted to decolonize the topic of systems and stakeholders itself. And the four, again, we had 4 authors here. We had Ranjani Balasubramanian, Hai Spoor, Ocean Burns, and Karen Parks. And Karen Parks will represent the chapter team. And so Karen is based in Edinburgh, Scotland. Karen works on biocultural diversity and intersections of land, language, and culture. Concerned about the parallel crisis of extinction facing languages, ecosystems, and diverse knowledge systems, her work links priorities of species conservation and language revitalization towards greater recognition of and support for multilingual, multicultural, and locally led approaches to environmental regeneration. With a DPhil in linguistics from the University of Oxford and an MPhil in conservation leadership from the University of Cambridge, she has held academic posts at Oxford, the University of Pittsburgh, and the Smithsonian Institution. She serves as Director of Language and Linguistics for the Ethno-Ornithology World Alliance, a digital knowledge platform which facilitates local documentation and management of traditional ecological knowledge. In collaboration with BirdLife International and the University of Oxford, she is also co-leading a new initiative with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to integrate cultural knowledge into the Birds of the World platform. She loves the idea of Green Silk Road connecting Asia and Europe. Over to you, Karen.
Nisha, thank you for so beautifully bringing us into the entire project and for that very kind introduction, because I share Ranjani's feeling about introducing myself. And Ranjani, it's just a privilege to be following in your leadership in taking on this chapter. To that point, I want to acknowledge that Ranjani was one of my co-authors in the second chapter of the anthology, along with Heiss and Ocean, and it was a remarkable journey working through this process. There's a lot going on this first slide, acknowledging just the rich sources of knowledge that we drew from in building up this this snapshot of how one might look through the lens of systems and stakeholders in a more diverse and inclusive way. I want to just note that right now, this slide is representing, if we include the more than human that was represented in a story of bears, salmon, and trees in British Columbia, we have 10 different case studies we're drawing on for this chapter. And as I'm here speaking to this just wonderful community gathered here today, I have to acknowledge I'm 3 steps removed from the richness that is presented here. And so each of these are little snapshots of living processes that are happening in rich places in the world. They've been engaged with by the different authors in this particular work. And now here I am speaking about them in this format. So it's one of these processes where you can use me as a little door to walk through. I would so encourage you, if you have the time, to come to this chapter like you would. I was thinking my metaphor for this would be the dawn chorus, when you wake up in the morning and you hear the many bird songs, that you can sort of tiptoe in and out of these stories, pick a song that captures your interest at that time, engage with it, and then step away and come again at another point. It's a really vibrant, exciting, and just space of growth in terms of how we can think about our relationship with these ideas of systems. So again, I want to just acknowledge this is drawing from 10 really amazing projects. And just given the limited time we have, ask that we shift into the next slide where we explore the takeaways from this chapter. So we came at it from, I think, a very at least in the framework that I was raised in. And so I came to this space really with a background in academia, conservation, a member of, communities in America and the United Kingdom that historically had drawn upon probably work really articulated by Donella Meadows in 1972 on mapping systems and acknowledging stakeholders. So a really kind of institutionalized academic space of being able to diagram the ways that, in an abstract way, the way that complex systems were happening in place. And we came to this chapter, initially, I would argue, with a question, and that was, how do the systems used to define and sustain human actions, identities, and priorities intersect with the rich, vast, complex, and complete ecosystem that is our living planet? And how do these diverse human systems interact with each other? And I think what was really exciting about this is realizing, one, that a systematic way of thinking is ancient, and that it has been kind of represented, expressed, shared across different cultures, communities, and spaces in many, many ways that really expand our approach to even being able to see how systems are shared. So just jumping into this, 3 takeaways I think we really pulled out of this and recognizing and mapping systems. One is that it is neither a recent invention nor an essentially Western ideology. That if you step back and look at it, regenerative philosophies are as old as humanity, realized over millennia across multitudes of cultural and ecological systems. When you kind of look at Meadows' work and how you bring the systems thinking to academic and institutionalized processes, you have the interpretation, representation, and communication of interconnected worldviews and practices. We need to note that they haven't been traditionally transmitted in a diagrammic or visual format. I mean, as I work from the space of language, language itself is a system, and it can be as simple as that. I know cultures where a whole process of the planting season and the harvesting season are tied into a particular word that is onomapeically drawn from a bird song. And you have just in one piece of language a whole system. So you have a migrating bird that arrives at the time of planting that gives a word for this is the time of sowing. And that then becomes embedded in song or practice or tools that are used for that process. And I find this beautiful that you can have a multi-species communication that embeds a particular system of food process and growing. Beyond language, so many cultures build systems into song and dance and story. So one of the first spaces to step when we're recognizing and mapping systems is really try to take if you're coming from a space similar to mine, step away from a Western ideology or a means that we have to map something out diagrammatically and see what is present in place already. Beyond that, it is necessarily diverse. So a system will just organically develop according to the unique requirements and livelihoods and geographies within a given community. And it's reinvented and adapted according to changing values, situations, and needs. And we see that again just in this snapshot of these 10 different community examples that are presented in this chapter. And it's most effective and powerful as an inclusive, locally grounded and living process. And I think this is really important to sit with because as I've worked in the spaces of conservation, I've noticed that there's increasingly an urgency trap where we feel this pressure of climate change and biodiversity loss. And especially if you're working in an institution, and I've spent some time in Cambridge where I see just remarkable people working in these big conservation organizations with this deep emotion about protecting what we have. It's so easy to say we need to do things fast and we need to do it top down to miss what is already in place and has been effective and powerful for, frankly, millennia. I'm watching the time, so I'll ask for a quickly switch in slides to get to some of the implications of these findings. So implications of these findings, I think we need to be aware of our unconscious assumptions that are embedded. And I'm going to start from our words in our language. And so right out the gate, this chapter talks about systems and stakeholders. And the word stakeholder is an interesting example of that. Like, what does that mean when you make someone a stakeholder? And is that taking away the power or the knowledge or the space? The leadership that is already there? And is rights holder a better word? And I think this gets even stronger to reflect what Ranjani was saying about the fate of sustainability, where it means all and nothing. I see the term regenerative heading that way so quickly as well. Language shifts. One of the case studies in this project, this would be led by Will Ruddock in Kenya. He argued, let's stay away from just new fancy terminology and lean into the words that have meaning, that have heart and emotion, love, health, compassion. And one thing I observed in many of these projects is each one has an embedded language. I'll ask for 3 more minutes. I can pull it all together. To move away from language, but just again acknowledge so much of what we're reflecting in this has its own embedded language that holds these systems. Additionally, there's values. And I want to again note the age of people and place and ecosystems. One of the projects represented in this chapter was with people in the Andes in Peru who've been working in potato cultivation for over 8,000 years. There's a rich embedded system in place that has kept this knowledge moving forward. Again, people in the Secwepemc culture in British Columbia have been custodians of the forests for over 4,500 years. It's worked. We see these areas of forest gardens that have such rich biodiversity. So it's acknowledging that there are rich values in place already present that have been effective for millennia, and then learning from what is already there and engaging with those values so that it has a meaningful context for the people who are going to continue moving that process forward. That leads into there was a very powerful example of the Viklap Sangam, the confluence of alternatives, and a global tapestry of alternatives, where you get starting with inclusion in one community, expanding to 20 communities, expanding to an alliance of the global south. This weaving together of locally grounded values and then finding commonalities across experiences. So finding where you can connect in a meaningful way. Engagement, a powerful example from the tech sector, where individuals in the Janatsu project were bringing in technology to local communities, but then confronting the fact that what they were bringing wasn't relevant or meaningful to communities, and evolving that into a process that was a powerful inclusion of community needs. And lastly, evolution, and I think that's consistent across these four other themes. I see it again in language. We can talk about traditional ecological knowledge, you can talk about folk knowledge, and in the way I speak with them in English, they have an embedded assumption that they are old, stale, and stationary. And that is not true. To return to the project in Peru, dealing with potato cultivation, it has 8,000 years of evolving history in a community being transmitted in systems of story, song, practice, and mapping. But I want to point out that this is also a living system that is working still today in addressing the challenges of climate change and community change. And just to turn on to the last slide to show again this dawn chorus of the ways that we speak about, understand, and interpret systems, I've pulled 10 words from the 10 case studies, and I'm happy to engage with more of them in the question and answer as you wish. But what I want to close with is, as we explore how this changes things, I think the real point we need to draw from this is how this changes us. And it starts from a place of humble curiosity, that as we engage both within our own space, our own communities, or if we are privileged to work with other communities who already have a rich knowledge of space, history, and generations of engagement in space, it's to start slow, and it's to start with understanding. 3 words I want to draw from this. Up here, the Sangam. This is an idea from India of a confluence of alternatives, bringing together gatherings of people for radical inclusion. Ayllus comes from the Andean context, and this means that we have 3 elements: people, nature, and the sacred are in balance for holistic well-being. Golly, there's so many wonderful ones, but just one last one, let's bring the fungi. So the mycorrhiza, that systems sometimes are represented in our environment. And so we can learn from how other systems work. And the worldwide web of fungi is a great example. And this is being drawn upon for a grassroots economic project in Kenya. So in closing, I encourage you to, when you have time, dig deeper in each of these really powerful stories of systems embedded in place, local knowledge, and inclusion. So again, I'm here when we have time for questions, and thank you for this very fast 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was a very exciting, introspective way of presenting this. Appreciate the beautiful way in which you did this. So we go on to chapter 3, which is named What is the Pluriverse? But this chapter, originally, I remember, started off before this, the original TOR. It was context, framing, and behaviors. And at that inception process for Lua and me, we were really like, how do we sort of open this up into a more expansive way of speaking about behaviors? And one of the fundamental parts of that ethos was that regeneration is an everyday activity. Regeneration is how we live life in a daily basis, right? So so that's why we broke open this whole idea into what is the pluriverse. And this chapter really looks at how regeneration is embedded into daily, seasonal, and intergenerational practices of care and stewardship at communities, which is the way of life across the world in its indigenous born of the land way, right? So through these place-based narratives, This chapter really highlights the interconnectedness of the human and the more than human, the relationships that co-evolve with ecosystems. It resists standardized formats to better reflect the complexity, diversity, and lived reality of regenerative systems. So this chapter, we had, again, 4 authors, Ashish Kumar, Shweta Srivastav, Wangwei Wakamonji, and Haispur. Hais was supposed to present this chapter to us on behalf of his chapter mates, but unfortunately he was taken quite ill and was unable to make it. So I request Anka, if you could present this to us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nisha. I humbly step into this because these are not my words, but the words of the 4 authors that Nisha just introduced. I would say that I feel really honored to have this chapter because in my role as Director of Innovation, one of my main challenges is to hold plurality and to put different worlds and perspective into dialogue. So given the nature of this work, where we invited different ways of seeing and interpreting and doing things, what I'm going to introduce now is my interpretation of this chapter. I'm sure that Heis, if he would have been with us today, he would have presented things differently. I would start by just drawing your attention on the beautiful land and the communities that have been acknowledged to understand, the depth and the richness and the spread of those who have contributed their thoughts and their wisdom to this. We move from Tibet to Japan to North Africa to Turks in Anatolia, and tribes in Western Ghats. How beautiful and rich is that? If we move to the next slide, I would start by saying that the pluriverse in itself, it invites us to rethink a very basic assumption that there is only one single way of understanding the world, our world. Instead, it really proposes something fundamentally different, that we live in a world where many worlds coexist at once. So the idea, I think, is very well captured in one sentence in the chapter: a world in which many worlds fit. The pluriverse is not simply about diversity, but it's about recognizing the different communities, the different cultures and beings that inhabit distinct realities, that have shaped their own histories, their own relationships and ways of knowing. Now, if we move to the next slide, what I think this chapter has done really beautifully is moving around the world and understanding, the plurality of perspective on regeneration. It tried to unpick, are there certain principles that we can see across these different forms of expression around the globe? And I will just take a few examples of these principles and invite you to dive deeper into the chapter to read more on the others that I will not be able to cover. But at the heart of the pluriverse is the recognition that, again, there is no single universal knowledge system. The chapter emphasizes that regeneration cannot be understood through one lens alone. Instead, it emerges from a plurality of knowledge systems, from a plurality of lived experiences and practices that have been gathered across the globe. So this means we need to hold multiple truths at once, as the beautiful quote that Ranjani provided from Christina Chaminade, where we can look with different lenses into the world. We have different interpretations, and oftentimes we see that tensions arise. I mean, it's very easy to see this, how it's being was the metaphor around the world, from what we are seeing here, from polarization to the systems that are currently collapsing. So rather than trying to reduce them into one coherent framework, the encouragement is to be able to hold this multiple truths together and the different interpretations. I found a beautiful quote from one of the authors, from Shweta, which I think synthesizes this and how we walk in the world. She said that in the forest, I am a human. In a city, I am a woman and a worker. What is the identity of an ecosystem? An ecosystem does not self-identify. We give it meaning by drawing upon our experience of the landscapes. So whose ecosystem do we aim to regenerate? Another beautiful principle starts from a key aspect of the pluriverse, in that these worlds do not need to merge into one. They coexist without being absorbed, without being simplified, without being ranked, though we know that's what we do all the time. We rank, we have dominant views of the world that try to impose on the others. And this chapter is explicit that encountering other worlds should not lead to their disappearance or subsuming, but rather to meeting them with humility and respect. And I think we know all too well that this is a significant and major lesson of the world that we are still struggling to absorb and to learn over histories of and decades and centuries and millennia of conflict. Now, this challenges the dominant approaches that try to categorize knowledge, that try to translate everything into one system, or treat differences as something to resolve. Instead, the pluriverse asks us to stay with these differences and understand that diversity, just like biodiversity, is our strength in the world. Now, I see that I have time to get maybe one or another principles or two principles. A beautiful point that was made earlier on is that the pluriverse is not only about the human perspectives. It recognizes that regeneration is shaped by relationships between humans, between ecosystems, and also by other species, by the more than kin beings. So the chapter describes systems as being interconnected, as co-evolving, and embedded very much in their locus, in place, where individuals, where communities, where landscapes and seasons are all part of the same living network. And this shifts the focus from seeing isolated actors, groups of stakeholders, to actually seeing the relationships. It moves away from focusing on the control to actually acknowledging the interdependence. And finally, I would probably pick up another one by saying that regeneration cannot be standardized. It is described as not as a one-size-fits-all framework, but as a mesh, enmeshment of lives and processes that are deeply contextual and intergenerational. This means that what regeneration looks like depends on the place and emerges from the local relationships and evolves over time. There is no universal pathway. The invitation here is to understand that the pluriverse does not ask us to define regeneration. I think it asks us something much more fundamental. And it goes back to the question that I was raising at the beginning. What becomes possible when we recognize that many worlds already exist, and then none of them should actually dominate the other? What does that open in terms of the possibility of how we navigate, how we engage, and how we lead our work? I think I will stop there. And yet again, I'm sure that if we have any of the authors of this chapter that would like to add a final thought and experience, I would welcome that. I think we don't, so I will revert back to you, Nisha.
Thank you so much, Anka. Thank you for stepping in and explaining these very profound, complex chapter in this very beautiful, memorable way. The fourth chapter is persistent harmful actions, which is a very, very significant chapter. As we reflected earlier, and this whole project started off as a state of knowledge of regeneration, and it was a report which evolved through 16 months into this work that it is. In a standard report, we always have a chapter on limitations. And so when Lua and I took a look at that, one of our immediate thoughts were like, no, that's not how we want to limit this work by focusing on the limitations. So that took us to this renaming and realigning and also reimagining what this chapter could be and how do we confront the harm and the coloniality that is standing in the way of regeneration. So this chapter pretty much examines how contemporary regeneration efforts can unintentionally reproduce colonial patterns and harmful paradigms. So it calls on us for a critical reflection on these inherited systems, to name them, to showcase them, and to look for practices that actively dismantle and move beyond them. So by confronting this discomfort and truth, it emphasizes that regeneration requires both awareness and transformation in thought and action. This chapter was a very emotional chapter for all of the authors. It was a very painful chapter as well. And what has come out of it was a lot of confronting a lot of trauma, intergenerational trauma. And the four authors of this chapter are Shweta Srivastav, Ashish Kumar, Wangui Wakamonji, and O'Shannon Burns. However, unfortunately, none of them were able to be present today to present this. So Lua has kindly accepted to present this chapter. Lua Kuoto, she was the co-leader of this project along with me and was part of this right from the very inception and vision and held all the way to the end, holding space for everything that happened. So Lua has a very deep relationship with this project. So Lua Kuoto is a researcher, facilitator, mentor, and creator of Regenerative Futures, grounded in the plural and insurgent perspectives of the Global South. As a woman of Afro-Indigenous Amazonian ancestry, she transforms collapse into passage, combining decolonial research, narrative curation, and sensitive facilitation to open spaces for strategic re-enchantment. She co-founded the collective Futuro Possivel in 2019, advancing regenerative education in Brazil, where she serves as director of research. She has also worked as director of future generations at the Latin Futures Association and as a lead researcher at Unearthodox, where she co-authored the State of Knowledge report on regeneration. With experience in organizations such as Purpose Brazil, as strategy director and teaching at ESPM Sao Paulo, she has collaborated on initiatives that bring together sustainability, innovation, and social transformation. She has also shared her ideas on stages such as TEDx Countdown, UNESCO, Rock in Rio Lisboa, and Creative Mornings. Over to you, Lua.
Thank you. Well, this chapter 4, like Nisha said, was a very sensitive chapter for all of us. And it is because it calls forth inner spaces connected to our own ancestral traumas tied to the process of colonization. So I'm pretty sure that for all of us involved on this chapter, as an author or as colleagues, was a very emotional one. And this chapter speaks of a different phase of regeneration, not the regeneration of flourishing and abundance, but the regeneration that resists, that fights back, that finds the spaces of escapes and possibility in the face of the oppressions of the current systems. So I think that this chapter asks us, what must we name, face, and unlearn while we become and practice regeneration? So before anything else, I want to acknowledge the authors that are not here, but were mentioned by Nisha, Shweta, Ashish, Wangui, and Ocean Burns. And the communities that you can see on the screen are the communities that were primarily or secondarily mentioned in this chapter. And there is very important to say that these are not case studies in the abstract. These are living peoples whose relationships to land, knowledge, governance has been and continues to be actively undermined. So we hold them all while we speak here. Next slide, please. Before speak about the chapter, there is a main question that is, what are persistent harmful actions? And here I want to acknowledge gestures towards the Colonial Futures Collective. That was the space where I first heard this concept. And like Nisha said, when we were designing the space and the project, we thought it could be a very good idea to look at the limitations in a more broader way from this perspective. So what are persistent harmful actions? O'Shannon puts it clearly on the ontology, saying we will not see regenerative futures without facing, walking with, understanding, and feeling the devastation, the pain, and anger of persistent harmful actions that have driven the current societal paradigm. So PAJs are patterns that are rooted in coloniality that undermine regenerative practice in indigenous, especially in indigenous and global South communities. And there are patterns that persist across language, data, law, economy, governance. And because they are often normalized, they are most of the time invisible, or sometimes even celebrated as progress, as development, as modernization. So this invisibility is part of how they work. So naming them, as this chapter attempts to do, is already a gesture. And we use this word gesture in all of this chapter as a response because we believe that in the face of the limitations that these oppressions put over us, sometimes what is possible are some gestures. So these gestures of disruption, they are the beginning of this process of unlearning. And I really like how Nisha wrote on the chapter opening, saying that this work as a chapter requires to take a hard look and face the truth, even when our discomfort encourages us to look away. And it's very important to say that the persistent harmful actions are not something outside of us. They are inside of us, and we need to face, look at critically, and work, do this inner work too. Next slide, please. Thank you. Talking about the main takeaways of this chapter, I think that the disconnection is the fundamental PAJ. And name it is the first gesture. And here we are talking about our disconnection with nature, with land, with the spirituality, with community, with the planet. While you navigate the chapter, you find a lot of dimensions and manifestations of this disconnection. So it's very important to understand that PAJs are not exceptions. They are structural. They are not consequences. They are what creates a space for the system that is working in and outside of us now. They are persistent and they are interconnected. And what we've learned is that communities with social cohesion, access to resources, and spiritual resilience, they are better positioned to respond to these actions. And unless regeneration serves to empower these communities, it risks reproducing colonial modernity. And that's why we center this anthology from the community perspectives. Next slide, please. On the next slide, we talk about the implications of the findings, some of them. So what does this mean for how we work? We begin with relationships, not objectives. So before we design, before we facilitate, before we propose, who are we in relationship with and on what terms? We move knowledge with care, because knowledge extracted without consent, without reciprocity, without attribution is another form of harm. Even well-intentioned research can reproduce colonial patterns. Intentions are not enough. We resist to the allure of universal frameworks, like was said before, including regenerative ones. So the pluriverse cannot be flattened into a single methodology. Every place, every community, every moment requires situated knowing. We shift from authority to accountability. So not who has the expertise, but who bears the consequences. This changes everything about how we enter a room. We attend to power and history always in every partnership, every facilitation, every research process, and this is very important. And we design for continuity, like was said before. Next slide, please. And there was this question on the slide for me to fulfill, how this changed things. And I would like to create tension on this question, because if we begin with this question, how does this change things? It means we are still centering in intervention, in control and outcomes. And regeneration asks us to shift that orientation before we even act. So to end, my suggestion is to put this in another question. How does this ask us to be differently before we act differently? Because I think the main ask of regeneration is not about how we act, but who we are. And in my spiritual tradition, there is a deity that is called Eshu, and Eshu, during all of our lives, they will ask us in all of the crossroads, who you are. So I think this is the main question for us as humanity now, who we are and who we want to be. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Loa, for your gentle and powerful way of bringing tensions and challenges into the room, like asking us to open up and go where we ourselves are afraid to go. So those were the 4 chapters. But I will request another half minute to just name and mention each of the other authors who were not part of this presentation today, only because earlier when I was introducing, it was interrupted by my own disconnection, internet issues. So quickly, the other authors who are unable to present today were Ashish Kumar, based in Bir, Himachal in India, and who works at the intersection of entrepreneurship, inner transformation, and regenerative culture building. Christina Shalmanade, based in Valencia and Costa Rica, is an uneorthodox economist exploring the intersection of regeneration practices, nature conservation, and environmental stewardship. Hai Spoor, based in Pondicherry in India, is a social entrepreneur with a background in organic agriculture and fair trade. Guadalupe Perez Jimenez is a passionate advocate for regenerative development, now based in Argentina after completing her studies in global project and change management at the Winshan University. O'Shannon Burns, based in Washington, D.C. and West Virginia, USA, and is a researcher and regenerative practitioner focusing on enabling collective action, system transformation, and well-being aligned economies. Wangwe Wakamonji, and I quote in her own words, in her words, I am a queer East African woman of 3 lineages who has most recently also been in East Africa. In each of my lineages, my people have experienced violent colonial dispossession and displacement from land. In one of my lines, I am of pastoral heritage. These ancestral wounds and ancestral healing inform my being. Shweta Srivastav, who's based in Netherlands, is a design researcher, educator, and sustainability consultant, and is originally from India and has co-founded the Global Co-Lab and lectures at Winshan University of Applied Sciences. Lindsay, and last but not least, I also want to mention Lindsay Elliott, who was not an author, but who was part of every meeting, every iteration, every discussion, who was a great support to all of us. She was sort of process documentation, but she too broke open the frameworks of these practices. The last chapter, which we will not go into today, but is the reflection chapter. And I started off this saying that we have this idea of what are the utopias, what is sitting with you. And this project, this report is not meant to end here. It takes an evolutionary form for each of the readers that goes through this chapter. So this is also a chapter where we invite you to do your own reflection piece. And what is part of this in the anthology is a reflection from the various authors. So this final chapter, it turns inward and it explores the personal and collective motivations that drive engagement with regeneration. It presents the anthology as a reflection of shared hope, faith, and purpose, shaped by diverse worldviews and experiences. Ultimately, it invites readers to consider the futures they carry within themselves and how these shapes the path towards regeneration. So I will end with saying this, that for each of you, as you read this, we invite you to write this for yourself, to explore what the utopias that you carry within yourself are, and what are the futures that you hope and imagine and put your faith in. Thank you. I hand this back to Anka.
Thank you very much, Nisha, for bringing chapter 5 in the spotlight as well, and the authors again. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and acknowledge the fact that it took us a bit longer to walk through the inspiring chapters, and I know we reached the end of the time, and I have suggestions. Those who want to have some and raise some questions but cannot stay here, please drop them in the chat and we will do our best to try and get back to you and answer those questions. Those who can stay, please, let's stay for 10 more minutes and we are happy to take a round of questions for the authors and the co-leads. The recording is there, it will be shared with everyone, so you can also just leave your question. We'll try to address it and then share the recording. So for those who would like to stay, I'm happy to throw the first question in the mix. This one was raised by Amy. I hope you're still with us now. Yes, I can see you there. Thank you, Amy, for this question. How did the authors manage the balance between making space for emergence, honoring the time it takes for deep understanding, and also keep momentum for this beautiful project? And I think this goes very much to the heart of this experience, of how much we can stretch and pull the initial structures, how we push against, what was the resistance to try and create the space for more emergence and meaningful content, relationships, and just doing things differently. So I'm opening this up to Lua, Ranjani, Karen, Nisha. Please, whoever wants to start to join their perspective, we'll try and keep it short.
I'll start just to put a voice in the mix, but it's an astute question that hits at, the heart of the process. And I'm not going to be able to answer it well, but I want to start from a place of gratitude, and it's just in the people around me and this beautiful session as it is. I think one of the biggest privileges in this very complicated process was the community we had to work with and the flexibility of the system we were engaged in. So it was, and I think some of the co-presenters here can speak to how challenging it was. It was really an evolutionary process for each one of us. I'd also speak, I think there were 12 of us involved in the crafting of the project. And each of us came from a different context that was deeply embedded with, you got a taste of that in the acknowledgement slides, but just remarkably rich and generous communities who shared their own time and experience and care for this. Just one last thing I can draw from is I know that every single individual involved in the project was deeply committed to doing the best we could to represent a concept that is far bigger than one anthology can hold. And so this, I hope, as others have expressed, is merely a starting point. I'll close my voice and see if others would like to jump on board.
No further thoughts? I think it's a lot of richness, Amy. Maybe I can share from practical perspective. We allocated a time, and that time doubled, triple, quadrupled in terms of length, expectations, depth of relationships, concepts that we went into, and the number of tears and joys that came from the process. Where we started and where we landed, it was completely transformative for every single individual. And I would say every step or every category of people involved, and that meant from the team, from the author to the colleagues, to the board, to the funder, where we really needed to create space to allow for more richness and depth and bring everyone along the journey to understand, why is it taking longer? Why is it costing us so much more than we initially planned? Why is there so much resistance to do the contracting differently? Think about how we meet each other differently. How do we allow for the different languages to come at play? And I always say that all of us had to learn a third language, an unknown language, and we were clumsy to begin with. And hopefully, by the end of it, there is still so much more to learn, but I think we understand a bit each other better. And I think, Karen, I'm stealing the analogy from your area of expertise. Yeah. Nisha, do you want to raise any of the other questions from the participants?
Yeah, I think from Prasun, is he still here? I believe there is such a beautiful relation of anthropogenic resemblance and regeneration. Can you explain more about how you selected the communities in different landscapes?
I can try to take that. I think with the selection of the community, it started with us. One of the things that a lot of us were in agreement with is that we wanted to really bring our connections on board and not just do a secondary literature review. So the communities that we engaged with were largely communities that we were already engaged with as researchers, or we had some connection with in terms of, our origins or, our intersections that have happened with these communities in our lives. And it was personal for a lot of us, and these communities were personal, and what we wrote was personal. And I think that also showed up in the kind of protectiveness that the authors had around the communities that they were working with, in demanding, that the kind of way in which we wanted to engage with them, and urging the longevity of that engagement, because we felt accountable to these communities.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Can I ask one more question related to that?
One short question, and then we'll.
So just a relation. Thank you, Ranjani, for telling that. I just wanted to understand, because I work with indigenous communities in the Central India landscape. So I want to know that how, did you find any thread to whatever existing, as a researcher, you were engaged with the community? Were you able to find any more thread with respect to the cultural aspects of regeneration, apart from what you have noticed, what you were going for on the field? Yeah, that's the question. Yes. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to take that? Karen, would you like to take that?
I'm sorry, Sal. I'm trying to get my head around still what it is that you're asking. When we're working with the communities, are you looking for if in that engagement we found further threads to deeper processes or other communities? Or if I may, would you ask a little bit more just to be sure I'm understanding you properly?
So I mean to say that, when I'm working, so I am also a researcher. I work with a specific 3 or 4 tribal communities. So when I was working with one community, and specifically with that specific community, I was not looking at some aspects of regenerative, agriculture, or regenerative, different ecological systems. But then some relations were there where it was interconnected with some other community, which I was not deliberately looking at them. So have you also noticed this kind of thing in your landscape or geography, kind of that?
Yeah, I actually can answer this question. It's a fabulous question. I mean, one example, I would respond, I think that's the case almost across the board in my personal experience. One particular example I could simply draw from the Systems and Stakeholders second chapter of the anthology would be the 2 seconds, I want to get my words correct. The Global Tapestry of Alternatives in the Vikalp Sangam project, where that is a project based in community interaction. So it starts from one community, expanding to 20 communities, then expanding honestly to an alliance of the Global South, where you have these layers upon layers of engagement that connect where there's commonalities and expand where there aren't. And it's something I would say I've seen generally across the board in this type of work, and I find it. Well, I have one more thing I could say on it. A friend of mine from the Sitwetmet community, apologies, has presented this as a strawberry movement, where you think about the strawberry plant and how it has these roots that expand. And so you have these different areas of fruiting, but they're kind of connected against larger geographies, and it can continue to expand by shared values. So I think that's a powerful observation and a powerful question. Thank you.
Can I just quickly add to that? 1 minute.
1 minute.
1 minute. Yeah. But present, I think what was interesting for me was it was quite the opposite, because I didn't go in looking for regeneration in the communities, but it was the other way around. I was looking at the work that I had done and trying to think what in this is regenerative. So that brought in, rather than looking for new practices or practices that I hadn't noticed, I think I was already looking at what I had seen and observed and noticed, and trying to understand what is regenerative about it. And that's what came into the chapter.
Thank you so much, Ranjani. and Nisha and Karen and Lua and everyone who joined us today and for taking the extra time for dialogue. Please do join us in the second session. Hopefully we will allow for more dialogue there to happen. We will share the dates once we hone down on them. And as we wrap for today, I just want to leave you with a thought to say that the future we are talking about in how we explore regeneration isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we can all shape moment by moment through the choices that we make. And I think for this moment in time in the world, it's easy to feel that the challenges we see in front of us are too big, too complex, too far beyond our individual reach. But I think real change really starts at scale. I really love the strawberry analogy. It starts in the everyday. It starts in the conversations, in the decisions, in what we choose to prioritize when no one is watching. And in many ways, it starts like this project started with a group of people who came together, who really refuse to comply with what feels too narrow, too limiting, who were able to ask different questions and to ask the questions differently, who were able to stretch each other, and sometimes making this process really uncomfortable, at times even challenging to hold, but also a gift at once. And these are the spaces I feel where something starts to shift, where we begin to push against the systems that constrains us, and start to imagine and practice something different. So the invitation it is to all of you, where in your own world, where in your own spaces are you able to see things differently and to act differently, and encourage you to be brave, to be bold, to take that step, and to find a community that is able to hold you, like we found each other through this project. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope to see you at the next seminar. And thank you, Bloom, for co-hosting with us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was
you.
great. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Mm.